Why do you always turn tenons? Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. I have to answer this question once and for all. I'm often asked, why don't you ever make a recessed mortise on the bottom of the bowl? You always make tenons. Well, first of all, I don't always make tenons. There are times when I do a recessed mortise. It's not very often, but I do make them. And there's specific reasons why I make those, and we'll talk about those in just a bit. First of all, before we go too much farther, we need to define what a mortise and what a tenon is. A mortise is a recessed area that the jaws of a four-jaw chuck expand into. They open up and lock into a recessed mortise. A tenon is a protrusion or an area that sticks out of the bottom of the bowl, and the four-jaw chucks, the inside of the four-jaw chucks, clamp onto a tenon. They both are sturdy. They both hold very well. You can use either one. And this brings up a really important point. What I'm going to share with you are my personal preferences, and I'm going to explain to you why I do prefer using the tenon versus the recessed mortise. With that being said, do what works best for you. If you were taught to do recessed mortises and you enjoy doing recessed mortises and you feel comfortable doing them, then continue doing that. You don't have to change just based on what I'm saying here. And there is no right or wrong way. There are going to be times where it will be a little trickier to do a recessed mortise and you will have different results than using a tenon, but again, do what works best for you. Just like tools, there are any number of tools or combination of tools that you can use to get the end results that you want when you turn a bowl. This is pretty much the same way. Do what works best for you. Okay, with all that being said, let's dive into why I prefer to turn tenons. Okay, number one reason, it's easy. It's very easy. The exterior of the bottom of the bowl is well exposed. Whether you have your bowl blank mounted securely to the headstock where a tail stock in a live center is not required or not, you can still easily turn a tenon and a shoulder. Even if the tail stock and live center are right there, you can easily maneuver your tools and create a tenon and a shoulder. If you're making a recessed mortise, you really want to have that tail stock out of the way to make a clean, full mortise. Now, here's another point that a lot of people don't really think too much about is this is a full recessed mortise, meaning the inside of the bottom of this is all even across. You basically just need to have enough space for the jaws of your chuck to fit into and expand. So in other words, instead of having this all leveled out across the center, you can create just a circular channel here as long as the jaws of your four-jaw chuck fit in there. And that's an option to do if you have no other way of mounting your bowl blank other than using a tailstock, because a tailstock is going to be connected right in the center of that mortise, and it's going to make it difficult to create a full mortise like you're seeing here. The second reason I prefer using a tenon is the fact that you only need a small portion of wood to grip the bowl. So this is a small log that the top flat part was here and the bottom of the curve through here. I only needed a small section of the base of this to be available for a tenon to be created and clamp on. Now, if I had decided I wanted to do this same bowl with a mortise, I would have to remove the material down in here so I had more space for that mortise to be secure. Because of the curves here, I need more space around a mortise. It's important to know that if you don't have enough solid wood around a mortise and you expand the chuck, there's a good chance that thin wall or that thin area of wood around the sides of the mortise can break or expand and cause problems while you're turning and come loose. That's not the case when you're using a tenon. If I have just a small area of wood available here, that's just enough for the jaws to clamp onto, and I can start turning very securely. The next reason I prefer using a tenon is that the center of the tenon is usually marked with the point of the live center. And if for some reason you've used a faceplate or maybe a screw chuck and you have the tailstock in place, that's fine as well. You can easily come in and make a little tick mark right in the center of the bottom of the tenon. Later, when you reverse the bowl on the lathe to remove the tenon and shape the foot, you can easily bring the tailstock right back up to that center point and the bowl is almost automatically centered. Now, when you create a mortise, because this is a semi-finished area, you don't have a center mark there. And if you need to reverse it and do any additional shaping here, you're going to have to bring the tailstock up to the mortise and you're going to make an indentation there. Now you could use a little scrap of wood to prevent marring the surface here, but you'll still have to find the center of this area and to center up your bowl. It's not as easy to do as it is when you have a tenon that already has the mark from the tailstock. When you have a tenon, we're dealing with a positive and negative situation here. We have a positive amount of extra wood or material at the bottom of the bowl. When you have a mortise, you have a negative or a recessed area where you have less material there. So if in the process of clearing out the inside of the bowl, you just happen to go a little too deep in the base of the bowl. Now I'm saying this because I have no idea how this could possibly happen because I've never done it myself. I've done it a few times, I'm completely kidding. But if you go through the bottom, if you go to the bottom of the bowl and you go too deep and you have a nice shoulder and a tenon, guess what? These act as a buffer for you. And many times you can potentially save a bowl because you didn't go through the bottom of the bowl. You still have the shoulder and the tenon there. You may have to shape the foot a little different compared to what you were originally thinking, but most of the time you can still save the bowl even though you accidentally went a little too deep on the inside. Now, if you have a mortised or a recessed bowl and you slip in your measurements and you go a little too deep on the inside, you're most likely going to punch right through the bottom of that mortise area. This is a really good reason, especially if you're starting out. It's a really good reason to adopt the tenon and shoulder technique because it creates a buffer for you and it makes it a little safer for you to shape the inside of your bowl without going through the bottom. You've probably seen several of my videos where I twice turn a bowl. That's where we rough turn the bowl once while it's wet or green, and then after it's dried over a long period of time, or if you've put it in a dryer or if you've dried it in a certain way, then once it's dried, it's distorted and changed shape. And then you can return it to the lathe and continue turning, and then you've got a final finished bowl that stays relatively round and true. The problem is that the entire bowl shifts and changes when it's drying. So the tenon and the shoulder contract as well as the sides contract on a mortise or recessed mortise area. Reshaping a tenon is pretty easy. You basically remount it to the lathe, put it in a jam chuck or on a big large faceplate, bring the tailstock up to that center and trim off the high spots on the side of the tenon and clean the tenon up so it's nice and round and true again, and then you're ready to continue turning it. When you have a mortise recessed area and you're twice turning, it's pretty difficult to, number one, bring the tailstock up and find the center because you didn't have a tailstock there most likely the first go around, and it's a little bit tricky to round out and reshape the inside of that mortise. While it's not impossible to reshape a recessed mortise, it can be done. It's just a lot easier reshaping the tenon and the shoulder when you're doing a twice turn bowl. When I'm turning a bowl and I get to the point where I've created the tenon and the shoulder, I have a couple decisions to make. I have to decide what the overall shape of the exterior of this bowl is going to be. And by creating that tenon and the shoulder, I have created the point, which I call this point B, and the rim's point A. And the only thing I have to do, the decision I have to make, is what shape I'm going to make from point A to point B. And that's another nice aspect of having the tenon in the shoulder created and established, is it gives you the end point or the bottom of the bowl, and you can see where the bottom of the bowl is going to be, and you can see what you're going to create down the road. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why I prefer using the tenon and shoulder technique versus the recessed mortise. And it's because I get to control what the bottom of this bowl looks like. Now, this particular bowl was turned. This has a pecan insert in here. And if you want to know more about how to do that, I've got a video. I did another bowl like this. You can check that out. But this bowl was created with a larger tenon, so I had a really good secure connection to the lathe while I was turning. But after I finished it, I got to incorporate the size and shape of the foot of this bowl into the overall look and feel for this particular piece. Now, this is a decorative bowl. It's not designed to be super functional. You can throw your keys in it and do something simple like that. But it's really designed for the appearance and the look. And when you have a tenon and a shoulder, you get to decide what that's going to be. And in this case, this natural edge, or this live edge rather, bowl that has this really elegant appearance, especially when it sits up off of the table surface with a raised foot like it is, and this small foot. This is again shaped. The last thing I'm doing is shaping the foot of this bowl and making this exactly the way I want it. And the big advantage of that is a large hole or a mortise recess is not dictating or controlling what the bottom of this bowl looks like. I, as the designer, get to decide what I want the bottom of the bowl to look like. Now, I could have done anything with this. This could have had a wider foot on it. I could have had the foot completely removed and just put a little flat spot there and let that sit so it's kind of wobbles. But you know, you have basically an infinite array of things that you can do when you create the tenon and shoulder. So you get into more functional bowls, larger bowls that have larger a foot on them. Those can be, you can control all that. The shape, the angle of the base of this bowl, I have it angled inward just a bit, just for the aesthetics of it. It could be angled out, it could be curved in. There's so much that can be done. To do this, if you are using a recessed mortise, can be done, but it's going to be really tricky, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have to initially create the mortise. You're going to have enough meat or wood around that mortise so that the chuck doesn't break out the sides. So that means you're going to have this big clunky base on the bowl initially. Then you're going to have to turn your interior blind. And you're kind of doing the backwards of what I always say when I'm turning, is the exterior of the bowl is the bowl. So work on the outside of the bowl, nail that down, and just make the interior of the bowl match it. If you're going to do this with a recessed mortise, you actually have to do the opposite. You have to make the inside of the bowl the way you want, and then you have to come back, remount the bowl backwards, and shape the base of the bowl and take those sides down. That thick, bulky bottom around the recessed mortise is essential for making sure the mortise stays secure, or the chuck stays secure inside that mortise and doesn't break through thin sides. So you can't start shaping a thin, skinny, narrow base to get a feel for what this bowl might look like. You can't do that initially because the mortise won't work. So you have to have this meaty area that you're going to go back to, and you're going to try to redefine that with the inside done, and you're going to pretty much be doing this blind. You're not going to be able to measure very well, because this whole thing is going to have to be in some sort of jam chuck to be held in place to reshape the foot. So that's why I much prefer just creating a nice tenon, holding the bowl securely, creating the exterior, clearing out the interior, and then doing the final shaping of how that foot will be at the end. And sometimes I don't use the tenon at all on the foot. Sometimes it's the shoulder area that becomes the foot, and at other times it's the tenon and the shoulder that become part of the foot. One of the big reasons that I enjoy using the tenon and shoulder technique and creating the foot and designing the foot is that the bowl looks finished when I'm done. I'm able to create a finished looking piece. It doesn't look as if something is off. This base, for instance, matches this bowl. It has a really nice size and proportion to it. It shows off the bowl, it elevates it, gives it a nice look, and it completes the bowl. Whereas even this piece, as fun as this piece is, there's something about this piece that just doesn't feel complete to me. We have this elegant square bowl, but when you flip it over, you get this weird circle on the bottom of it that really doesn't match anything, and it's just there. Because it has to be there. There's not really an easy way to remove that. We could sand the whole bottom down, or we could remount it and turn the bottom down, but it's just going to be a lot of work. And having this circle just kind of leaves this question in the air. For me, again, this is my preference and this is my opinion. It just feels incomplete. And I know that lots of bowls have recessed mortise in the bottom of them, and many of them look great. But for me, it just feels as if the bowl is not complete. Okay, at the beginning of this video, I said that I don't always make tenons. Occasionally, I do make recessed mortises, okay? And I'm showing you an example of one here, and this is a really good example. Why would I use a recessed mortise, and when would I use a recessed mortise? Many times when I'm doing a turning that's really thin, platters are a great example. They're very thin, don't typically add an extra connection for a tenon on the bottom of a platter. The other instance when I use them is when I have a piece of exotic wood or an expensive wood, or in this case, rare wood. This is a piece of chestnut from the early 1900s. It's about 1.5 inches thick. So I really didn't have a lot of material to be making a tenon and a shoulder and then turning the piece. If I were to do that, I would have a very shallow bowl. You'd almost barely see the curve in it versus what you see here with this four-sided square bowl. So those are the situations when I will use a recessed mortise, when I have a rare piece of wood that's expensive and it's thin, and platters. Those are the occasions when it makes the most sense. In general, I am a huge fan of using a tenon, and now you know why I prefer to use a tenon versus a recessed mortise. For me, the overall finished look of a bowl is really important. Whether it's a functional bowl that has a well-sized tenon or base, tenon that turned into the base of the bowl that can be easily held with one hand, or if it's an elegant piece that's designed to look delicate and sit on a counter and be somewhat aesthetic, I prefer having that controlled and change the way the bottom of the bowl looks, and I need that extra tenon area to control that and create the foot. And if you're just getting started in turning, you're going to find a lot of benefits to using a tenon and a shoulder, especially when you have issues with figuring out the depth of the inside of the bowl. Trust me, I was there, I know what happens. And to have that extra meat there and to slip into that a little bit instead of going through the bottom of a recessed mortise is much better, trust me. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, do me a huge favor and click that like button and also subscribe. And if you haven't already, check out my website, Turn a Wood Bull. This topic and tons of other topics all about turning bulls are addressed there, and you're going to find tons of information, especially if you're just starting out or if you've been turning for a long time. I have a website that's dedicated to nothing but turning wood bulls, and it's called turnawoodbull.com. So go check that out and enjoy. All right, guys, leave me a comment. I'm guessing I'm going to hear from you recessed mortise guys, and you're going to tell me how great recessed mortises are. And just remember, I'm not saying they aren't good. I'm saying do what works best for you, and I'm showing you what I prefer to do and what works best for me. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, happy turning.